But what can be the real challenge is, okay, mom and dad, 2 kids are here. They're here for an hour. And they might only talk to you for 10 minutes. What lesson can you get across to that family in 10 minutes that might make mom or dad or junior want to say, like, oh, I want to read more, or I'll buy the book about that in the gift store. Pressure's on. And so something about that challenge and that opportunity is my favorite way to get to share history.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Total Michigan, where we interview ordinary Michiganders doing some pretty extraordinary things. I'm your host, Cliff Duvenois. Today, I'm in the city of Port Huron, and I'm rather embarrassed to admit this, but the amount of time that I've spent in Port Huron, the number of minutes you could probably count on one hand, and I've decided I'm going to change that because there's actually a lot of cool things that are going on in Port Huron, and whenever I come to a new city, one of the first things that I love to do is visit the local museum because there's so much rich history, and every place in Michigan just seems to really embrace not only their local heritage, but also at a state level and in some cases even a national level. With that being said, today we are talking to the manager of community engagement. That would be Andrew Kerscher.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming in. It's been already a great time this morning getting to I think you made the right call in coming to Port Huron and adding to those minutes that you've spent here.
We're now over an hour. But yeah, so this is absolutely great. And so Andrew, why don't you, because it's not just the Port Huron Museum. So why don't you talk to us? What is the Port Huron Museums?
That's right. So Port Huron, amazing. We are a city of just less than 30,000 people. And there's 6 museums in town. It's crazy. It's just there's so many. It's got to be one of the highest per capita museums. But at Port Huron Museums, we run 4 of them. So we are in our Carnegie Center. That is the museum that we have open year-round. It's our Carnegie Library from 1904. They built a new library in the 60s, and the museum got to move into this really cool building. And we also have 3 satellite sites, kind of what we call them, because they're all right along the water. They're all just about less than 2 miles away. And they're all within a mile of each other on the beautiful waterways, the St. Clair River and Lake Huron. And that's the Fort Gratiot Light Station. So that's the oldest lighthouse in the state of Michigan. It goes back to the 1820s. We have the Thomas Edison Depot Museum. So Thomas Edison is Port Huron's favorite son. He grew up here in town. In fact, his very first job was working at a train depot where he rode the train from Port Huron to Detroit. And we're lucky enough to still have that depot from the 1850s as around. So we've turned it into a museum all about the world's most famous inventor. And we also have the Huron Lightship. So this is a floating lighthouse. We're all about aids to navigation here in Port Huron. But the Huron Lightship was an active lightship until 1970. It went out onto the lake, floated on the Corsica shoals, made sure that the freighters stayed clear. And when it retired from decades of work, we were able to score it and turn it into a museum. So it's the only lightship you can visit on the Great Lakes.
So now let me ask you this question real quick. Can somebody buy one pass to get access to all of those museums?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually fortunate enough right now, through at least the middle of the summer, we've gotten a couple of grants. We're working on securing some more that 3 of our sites are actually free admission. So everything except the Lighthouse, which we run in conjunction with the county parks. We've got kind of a 3-legged stool. There's a friends group, the county parks. It's a really cool county park. And museum membership actually gets you into all of the sites. But at any of our sites, admission is pretty reasonable. We got some great deals for families as well.
Nice. Now, what I'd like to do, Andrew, is I'd like to take a step back here. Why don't you tell us, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up right here in Port Huron, not too far from where we sit right now. So this is my hometown. This is where all of my folks still live. I got the chance to come back to town after working in different parts of the state. And it's been great to really come and kind of experience the town anew. It's really different from when you're a kid to when you move back as an adult.
Isn't it interesting how that happens?
It really is, and I enjoyed it. I consider myself incredibly fortunate. I think like you, we both really enjoy Michigan. We've seen lots of different parts of it. I worked when I went to college. I studied history. No surprises there, I wouldn't think, for somebody who's a historian. And I got a job up in Mackinac. It was really a dream job for me. I should even back up. When I graduated high school, it was 2008. A lot of people remember the Great Recession hit. It was pretty miserable. hit the thumb really hard. So when I came back to town after my first semester away at college, I couldn't even get my job back at the movie theater slinging popcorn.
Ooh.
We had like 30% unemployment. It was crazy. So I said, what am I going to do? I got a lot of time on my hand. I want to invest it somehow. And so I wound up volunteering here at this museum. I was an unpaid intern and just decided to get my feet wet, see if I liked museum work. And it turns out I did. I loved the museum field. And I said, that's what I really wanted to do in one way or another. So by the time of that next summer, I still decided I wanted to do museum work, but I wanted a different opportunity. And I worked up in Mackinac for Mackinac State Historic Parks. And that really hit home. It's what I love doing, is being an interpreter, getting to share history. So I was one of the soldiers up at like Fort Mackinac, Fort Michilimackinac. Cool. It's not often, it's kind of a weird thing to work into your resume to be like, oh yeah, I was a sergeant in the British Army for 5 years in the 1770s. Weird skill set. I can do that in office, but it was an amazing experience. So I lived and worked up in Mackinac for close to a decade, really enjoyed it. And in the winter, you always had to find a second job. And so this is where, like I said, our love of Michigan, getting to see all the different corners of it, I did outreach for the fort. So we'd go to elementary school classrooms, put on a program, we'll drive around in the state van. I did programs everywhere from Escanaba to Monroe. It's been the whole winter going, classroom to classroom. Right. Everywhere from, big cities, we'd spend a couple of weeks in Detroit, Grand Rapids. But I also went to places like Mesick, the mushroom capital.
I actually know where that is.
Yeah, the little tiny places. I'm like, I get to go to like Mesick Elementary School. It was a great job. But then ultimately, one winter, there wasn't quite as much outreach available. I had to still find another job because your bills don't stop in the winter. And I wound up working for the Grand Hotel. I had some friends who worked there. They were able to score me a security gig. And I often ask people, have you ever seen The Shining or read the book? Because I lived it. So I was the winter caretaker for the Grand Hotel. I like to think I did a pretty good job. It didn't burn down. It's still there. But boy, was that a long, incredibly cold. It was the winter of 2014. We went like 30 days where it didn't get to zero. Bitter cold, very lonely. There's not a lot of nightlife on Mackinac Island in the winter. Or so, sleep during the day, work at night. And I decided then and there, I said, I'm going to go back to grad school and I'm going to find me a museum that's open year round.
So let me ask you this question first before we go much further. So what did you study when you were in college?
History and philosophy. So that was my undergrad.
Why history?
History is something my grandfather was big into history. He collects old cars. I kind of grew up at around his house. It was something I just took to like a fish to water. I always loved history and all aspects of it, and getting to share that passion with others. So I said, I'm going to study that. When I first went off to Albion, my plan was I was going to become like a PhD. I wanted to be like, I'm going to be a history professor. And then, there were some foreign language requirements. And although I had the 4 years of high school German, it was nicht so gut,
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know. But then when I saw the world of museums, like, this is a great way to take that love of history. And then in some ways it presents its own set of challenges. You don't get the opportunity to have, an entire semester with the same group of people. I think that can be really fun. But what can be the real challenge is, okay, mom and dad, 2 kids are here. They're here for an hour. And they might only talk to you for 10 minutes. What lesson can you get across to that family in 10 minutes that might make mom or dad or junior want to say like, I want to read more, or I'll buy the book about that in the gift store.
Right.
You got a limited amount of time. The pressure's on. You don't get to give them a grade. You don't get them to come back week after week after week. You got a couple minutes. That's it.
Right.
And so something about that challenge and that opportunity is my favorite way to get to share history, as a really fun way to engage with that. So that's museum work. I always knew that's what I wanted to do. An opportunity opened up at my hometown museum in Port Huron. And at the time, my girlfriend was living here. She's now my wife. She's the lighthouse keeper here in town. As I mentioned, my folks, my mom still lives here. My grandparents still live here. So those two things happening right within the same month, I was like, seems like a sign if there's ever been one. And that was 5 years ago. Jumped on it and moved back to Port Huron and haven't looked back since.
What was that transition like, going from, big city, big budget to now small hometown?
Yeah, not going to lie, I took a pay cut to move back home, but there are some things that are a little bit like, it's cheaper to go to a restaurant in Port Huron.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know if anywhere else has cheaper Taco Tuesdays than here in Port Huron. And having that great support network from my family here, and eventually I was able to afford a house here, which I just don't think would have been the case in even a place like Dearborn. My wife and I, we bought, and I'm always embarrassed to say this, we bought an 8-bedroom Victorian mansion that I don't think I could have bought anywhere else in the state. It worked out. We were in the right place at the right time. We bought it the week before COVID hit and kind of shut everything down. And I live right on the main street of town. I love that so much that I can walk to work. I rode my bike to work today. You know, it's great to be able to do that. But it is a challenge. But like I said, being from here and then getting to share your own hometown history, there's something just extra about that. I think that really does something for me. And I'm always proud to get to share the stories of why Port Huron is an amazing place, why we have this cool history. And there's something about, it's kind of like an underdog. I always feel like I'm getting to tell people, let people in on a secret that they don't know about in Port Huron, that it's well kept, that people are like, oh, yeah, I didn't know that. This is a cool place. We do have a lot of cool history. So getting to stick up for a place like Port Huron that I really care about was a big draw. But it's also small enough that, like, I know all my friends and neighbors. When I go downtown, I can name most of the store owners. I can't go out shopping without running into, like, lots of people I know. We were talking about your interview list of people you're going to talk to in town. I know most of them. You know, they're friends of mine, which is just great to get to live in an environment like that. Like I said, there's a lot of support you find in that small town. For me, it's a real Goldilocks zone of it's not too small, and it's also not too big. It's perfect.
Nice. For our audience, we're going to take a quick break and thank our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to talk to Andrew about what you can expect when you come to the Port Huron museums. We'll see you after the break. Hey, if you are enjoying these great interviews, just take a moment and go to totalmichigan.com/join, and you can get these episodes sent directly to your inbox because there's a lot more great stories coming. See you there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Total Michigan, where we interview ordinary Michiganders doing some pretty extraordinary things. I am your host, Cliff Duvenois. Today, we're in Port Huron, and we're talking with the manager of community engagement, as well as historian and the man about town, Andrew Kerscher. And Andrew, if you would, one thing I like to do is just for the audience, if they're going to come to one of these museums, just like take a couple minutes and just talk about, okay, here's, the Fort Gratiot. Just talk a little bit about that and then just kind of go from there.
Absolutely. Because I think one of the things that makes us so unique is those sites are so different. The furthest north of our sites is right at the base of Lake Huron, and it's the Fort Gratiot Light Station. Now, we always say light station here rather than just lighthouse because we always want people to realize it's more than just the tower. It is the oldest lighthouse in the state of Michigan, which is pretty amazing. Coming up on 1825, the very first tower was built. It's actually not the tower that's there. It was rather shoddily constructed and actually put in kind of a bad location. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise when it blew down in a storm. After it blew down, they relocated it in 1829. Congress spent $5,000 on this in the 1820s.
Big money.
That is a lot of money, but it should tell you just how important this spot is for shipping on the Great Lakes. Everybody's going to be passing by Port Huron. If you want to get into Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, you're going to come by here. And we were talking a little bit earlier, the current sometimes is upward of 10 knots. It's an incredibly dangerous current. That's why they wanted that lighthouse here and why it was constructed so early. So you've got the tower, but the tower is still in use today as an aid to navigation. So there are a lot of buildings that were built a little bit later on. So we have a duplex from the 1870s. There's actually a Coast Guard station put in by the 1930s when the Coast Guard takes over from the Lighthouse service. So when you come onto the grounds and you look around, our goal is to make it look as it appeared in the 1930s. That's when the more recent buildings are from. And so that's kind of the era we've chosen to interpret because, if we were picking, say, the 1870s, you'd have to tear down some of the buildings. And we're not in the tearing down business.
Right.
So it's a really amazing tour that you get into all of those buildings. You get to see the keepers' quarters, see eventually the crew quarters are going to be restored. It's an ongoing effort. And it's pretty amazing. You do get to climb the tower. You get to go out on the gallery. There's not a lot of lighthouses where you get to do that, step outside and we always call it the best view of the blue. We're the blue water area, the water here. Everyone's always amazed by how exceptionally blue Lower Lake Huron and the St. Clair River is. You get to look at the Blue Water Bridge. I mean, they named it that for a reason. That's the bridge connecting us and Sarnia over into Canada. And you can see all of that from the top of the tower. It's really amazing.
Now, you were telling me before that, correct me if I'm wrong on this, But basically, all the ships that get access to the Great Lakes have to come through.
Yeah, if they want to go to those upper lakes. So if you're going up to Huron, Michigan, or Superior, all of that water is draining. And if you think about the bottom of Lake Huron being a funnel, we are the drain that all of that funnel is coming through the St. Clair River. And the amazing thing is the St. Clair River is so narrow that, a really good golfer, he can put a Titleist over into Canada. It's pretty narrow, so there's a lot of turbulence right there.
Sure.
And a very strategic point. I mean, that's one of the reasons the French built a fort here back in the 1680s. Fort Gratiot takes its name from actually the American fort with a French-sounding name. Charles Gratiot was of French extraction. He was the supervising engineer, and there's a good lesson you can learn from history is if you want to get on your boss's good side, name the fort you're building after him. That'll get you some brownie points. So Fort Gratiot was a military installation here from 1814 during the War of 1812 up until the 1870s. And that's where the Fort Gratiot Light Station gets its name. And actually, there's only one building of Fort Gratiot left. It's the Post Hospital. And we're so proud that this summer, that's going to be open again after a multi-year restoration. We were able to secure some grant funding. And you're going to be able to learn about the medical and military history of this area that goes back hundreds of years at that building that's on the grounds there of the Fort Gratiot Light Station.
So talk to us about another museum.
Yeah, so if you head just south of there, a couple hundred yards, you'll run into the Thomas Edison Depot. So this train depot, I have often said it's a Grand Trunk Depot. That's the railway that's actually out of Canada and crossed most of Michigan as well, the Grand Trunk and Western. Any little town or city would be proud just to have an 1850s train station that's still around. Those things are always turned into little historical societies. They're really pretty amazing buildings. They'd be proud just to have that. The fact that ours also has this connection to Thomas Edison is what really puts it above the top. So Thomas Edison's family moved to Port Huron when he was a little kid. He was the youngest of the bunch. His dad, Sam, they moved out of Milan, Ohio. That they saw the railroad didn't come to town there, and they said, we're not risking it. This town doesn't look like it's on a ticket to prosperity. So they move out of town there and they come to Port Huron, which they saw on the Grow. And that's where Edison grew up. He spent his formative years here. He got his first job he was a news butcher. So that meant he sold newspapers, magazines, nuts, gum, candy, apples, you name it.
Sure.
On the train to these people who are riding back and forth to Detroit. And as soon as he gets any of that money, he spends it on experiments. He's always buying chemistry sets. In fact, he at one point accidentally sets one of the train cars on fire because they let him have a little laboratory. And amazingly, they throw him off the train, but he doesn't get fired. You set one train car on fire, you get into trouble. But he does some amazing things. As a teenager, this is astounding to me. It's during the American Civil War. It's like 1862. Everyone is starved for news. You hear a great big battle has taken place. What's the first thing you want to know? Who won?
Right.
Was my kid, a Michigan unit fighting there? Did they get annihilated? I need to know any kind of news about something like that. And Edison knew that. And so he actually was friends with the telegraph operators along the line. So he got the news kind of ahead of time, right from them, right from 19th century Twitter on the telegraph.
Yeah.
And he bought extra copies of the newspaper. And at every stop, he'd up the price and say, I only have a limited number. I don't have enough.
Nice.
This went from a nickel to a dime to a quarter by the end of the run, and people would pay it. So his business acumen really showed through. And he would eventually go on to actually print a newspaper on the train. He had a little tiny galley press. So it was a newspaper, maybe, 8.5 by 10. It was kind of a one-sheet paper that he'd print with news he heard on the train and things he could pull from the wire. And he printed it. It was the first time anything was ever printed on a moving train. And he was a teenager.
I never even knew that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So the Port Huron Herald that he's handing out on this train, printed on the moving train, that really shows you how forward-thinking he was even as a teenager. But eventually, he did get lessons in telegraphy from a station master. He saved a kid from being hit by a train, was playing on a train track, and picks up a 3-year-old from getting hit by a boxcar, and the station master says, well, how can I repay you? And he says, teach me the telegraph. That seems like the real way of the future. I want to know Morse code, things like that. As soon as he learned that, he was kind of off and running. And for a little while, he wanted to be a telegrapher and work for railroads. He had some kind of misstarts with that, and he worked briefly in Canada. At one point, he was going to go to Brazil, but then decided the real money was inventing things for that. And he eventually moved to New York, actually over to New Jersey. As a young man, he was able to get a little bit of money from some of his early inventions, like the quadruplex telegraph that allows you to send multiple messages on one line. He gets his dad, Sam Edison, is the one who tells him, you should build your factory at Menlo Park in New Jersey. He says it's like the perfect distance. It's close to New York City, but not in the city. It'll be cheaper. You're close to investors. And his dad actually goes out and builds that. And that's where he makes most of his most famous inventions.
Nice.
Perfecting the light bulb, the phonograph, these things that kind of defined the 20th century and changed the way we operate. And the building he built him in was built by Sam. His whole family lived in Port Huron the rest of their life. So he came back to Port Huron many times. He wanted to be buried here, but his second wife actually stuck him in the backyard in New Jersey. So he had the severe handicap of having already been dead. So he couldn't tell his wife, move me. But we take care of his grave sites here in town. They're part of a lot of our tours through the cemetery and things like that. And it's a really amazing connection. I'm always a strong Edison apologist. There are people out there today that want to bring him down a peg or two or make these wild claims, these stole inventions. And it's just, he actually kept really good records. None of that's true. I always tell people, if that's true, you got any proof that that's an extraordinary claim? Requires some extraordinary evidence.
Yep.
Edison certainly was a businessman. He was in it to make money. He wasn't just doing it for the good of humanity, but we certainly benefited from it. He made a lot of money, was a wealthy man, and certainly one of the greatest geniuses in world history.
I always tell people when these kind of topics come up, I always say just because Hollywood made a movie about it doesn't mean it's true.
Exactly. What you read online is not, contrary to some belief, just because they put it online doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah, exactly. So what's next?
So we also have the Huron Lightship. That is that floating lighthouse we talked a little bit about at the beginning. It's an amazing piece of engineering. It's over 100 years old. It was updated in the 1940s with new engines, but it's permanently dry docked. And it's a museum ship. So you walk on board, you can tour the whole ship, go down in the engine room. For a ship that's just 92 feet long, believe it or not, we have our captain of the lightship. His name is Jerry. If you really like lighthouses, I can personally attest to, I went on a 4-hour tour of a 92-foot long ship with Jerry. There's so many stories, so many things to tell.
Sure.
So there's something for everybody on there. So if you really want to get into it, Jerry's your man. He can show you everything. But a lot of people come, they'll go on the tour. It's an amazing place to watch freighters go by right there on the St. Clair River. We maintain air pressure in the air horn, so we blow a Great Lakes salute. That's one of the things that I'm always think is really neat. So if you're ever around the Great Lakes and you hear one long blast of the horn followed by two short, just like burr, 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 that just means hello on the Great Lakes. It's a special thing the pilots do to each other. And we always blow salutes at all of the ships go by. And the ones that aren't jerks return the salute to us. So that's just a really amazing experience to be on the weather deck on a nice summer or spring day and see those freighters go by. It's all the fun of being on a ship without being seasick because you're actually on land. So an amazing place to get to check out. One of the very few, there's only about a dozen left in the world. This is the only one in the Great Lakes that you can see a floating lighthouse.
That's actually cool. That's actually very cool. What's next?
So our last site is our main site. Our main museum is the Carnegie. That's where we are right now. We're right here actually in our Maritime Gallery up on the second floor. So this stays open year-round. Our satellite sites, they generally run April to December. The spring months, we take a little bit of time to do some work there. And there's just not as much tourism when the kids are back in school in February and March, that kind of time. But the Carnegie, we do stay open year-round, and we have 3 different floors of exhibits. Our Maritime Gallery is a permanent exhibit. We have permanent Black History exhibit, permanent Indigenous History exhibit. Those kind of change out a little bit, but those topics are always the same. And then our main galleries are where we rotate things. Sometimes we bring in exhibits that are pre-made from elsewhere and are on tour around the country. There are other ones that we make in-house, and I am so excited this summer, all the way through until October, we have a really, really fun exhibit. We have Barbie. What Was I Made For is the name of our exhibit. There's some amazing collections, some stuff that has been brought in from some private collectors, some stuff from within the museum collection, lots of hands-ons, lots of photos opportunities, some great places for selfies. We have gone all in. We're all pink all summer long. It's just a fun exhibit. Who doesn't love Barbie? The movie really inspired a lot of us at the museum when we were talking about upcoming exhibits, and there's always a little bit of time that goes into making one. It's going to take a couple of months to get all of your ducks in a row, fabricate things. So it's a really fun exhibit. Like I said, we rotate stuff throughout the year. So even if you don't come this summer, there'll be something different next summer. And there's always something to see at this fabulous, we call it the Carnegie because, of course, it is an old Carnegie library. And outside of Detroit, this is actually the largest Carnegie library in the state of Michigan.
So I want to go back and explore something here a little bit because you talked about this Barbie exhibit that's coming here. So how does that idea meeting go? Like, we got to bring in an exhibit. What are we going to do? Hey, why don't we do Barbie?
Yeah, we have weekly brainstorming sessions with basically all of our senior staff. So, curator, myself, our executive director, we all sit down and we usually come up with a list of like, here's things we got to tackle for the next week. And museums, we're always looking usually at least a year out on our exhibit schedule, if not longer. And that was something we said, what can we do? And this was actually something that one of our board members said, hey, I've got a friend who's got a really big Barbie collection that they might be willing to loan us. And that was kind of the kernel of where this started. We said, all right, well, if we can get one, maybe we can get a couple. If we can get a couple, well, then we can get a Barbie car and a Barbie box that you can step in and other stuff on loan and other stuff from the collection. What can we do? So, we try and tie things locally. Our mission at the museums is to preserve and illuminate history and culture for the benefit of our community. And honestly, our community in some ways is Port Huron. In other ways, it's the whole Blue Water area, St. Clair County. And in other ways, it's just anyone who comes and visits us. We have visitors from all around the world. So if you come here, you can learn about history and culture in some way. And hopefully when you leave a museum, I'm pretty passionate about saying that when you leave a museum, if we've done our job, you're a better person than you were when you walked in.
So, Andrew, if somebody's listening to this and they want to connect with you, follow you online, learn more about the museums here, because summer's going to be on us before we know it, where can they go?
Absolutely. So our website's always a great start, porthuronmuseums.org. If you just Google Port Huron Museums, we'll come right up. And we've got a great website that we always update with our hours and current admission rates and deals, that sort of thing, and our current exhibits and any fun events and programs we have coming up. That's where you can go to book tickets for things like our trolley tours we do throughout the summer. We've got lots from murder and mayhem themed ones to architecture, usually at least one every single week. It's a great place to find all that. Another place to find and follow our content is our social media. So we have an Instagram, we have a Facebook page, and we're also Museum Shenanigans on TikTok. So we cover all our bases, but our Facebook page is very active. You can find all of the events there, and we get to share, things out of the archives. That's part of my job is I share, anniversaries or interesting, clippings from the past or pieces of our artifacts. So a great way to stay in touch with Blue Water area history is by following us there. And again, Port Huron Museums on all of those social medias.
Andrew, thank you so much for taking time to chat with us today. Really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming in. I think it's sad that maybe we're a hidden gem. I'm thanking you for making us maybe not so hidden.
Definitely not hidden. For our folks, you can get all the links that Andrew mentioned above by going to totalmichigan.com and clicking on his interview. We'll see you next time when we talk to another Michigander doing some pretty extraordinary things. We'll see you then.